virtual event. My name is Michael Takeuchi, and I am the events coordinator at Chaucer's Bookstore in Santa Barbara, California. For more events, please check chaucersbooks.com and click on the events tab. Tonight, I am personally pleased to hold this virtual book talk with my friend and former colleague, Thomas Kelsey, for his book, 75 Years Later, Warbirds, Airmen, and Veterans of World War II. Tom has been a photojournalist for over 4 decades for 9 newspapers, including the LA Times, Press Enterprise in Riverside, and the Rocky Mountain News in Denver. He was also the chief photographer for the Outdoor Channel. He's won many awards, including a National Press Pictures of the Year Award, Photographers Association. He's a 2-time Colorado Press winner, an 8-time with California Press, and a 12-time winner with the greater Los Angeles area. He was also a member of a Pulitzer Prize winning team in 1983 with the Los Angeles Times. And he's covered Olympics, World Series, PGA Championships, Super Bowls, papal visits, and the 1989 Loma Prieta or San Francisco earthquake. He's also taught journalism at UCLA, USC, and Long Beach State. His work has appeared in Time, Newsweek, U.S. News and World, American Photo, Sunset, Sports Illustrated, Teen, we got to talk about that one, Tom, Westways, and Life magazines. Please welcome via his home in Marietta, Tom Kelsey. Hi, Tom. How are you doing?
Just dandy. How are you, Mike?
I'm great. You were born in Pasadena. You grew up in Santa Barbara and San Luis Obispo. You went to Dos Pueblos High School where you ran for the great coach Gordon McClenathan, and at Santa Barbara City College. And that's pretty much where you got your start in journalism, wasn't it? With the great Ray Canton.
That is correct. Yeah. Yes, he was a real go-getter. He was a very outgoing person, and he took me under his wing and really liked what I did and pushed me and became my mentor. And he was a great guy. He was also a runner.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, you know that, of course, right?
Yes.
Yeah, he was a runner, and he just he had a very interesting way of speaking, and he pushed me really hard, and he kept telling me the sky was the limit, and I really took him at his word, and he kept telling me, he was it's kind of hard to put him in a eggshell, but what he would do is he'd go out on a run, and he'd come back from his run all tuckered out, and he'd come into the newsroom and he goes, "God, I need a cigarette." And I'm like, and that blew me away, because as a runner, you don't smoke and run, but he did. And but he became a good friend and a great mentor. And when I went on to Cal Poly, he not only helped me get my internship back in New York, but he even actually gave me a scholarship money. He says, I'm making a scholarship just for you, so I'm going to help you out, because I know you're eating probably beans and back in New York. And so he was very instrumental in helping me get going. He was a great mentor and a great teacher.
So what was that experience in New York like? It's for New York Newsday, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was in Newsday on Long Island, and I was 21 years old, and my folks gave me a car, and I drove it back to New York. Mm-hmm. And I worked there because you needed a car. You can't be a news photographer without a car. And so I every weekend, when on my day off, I would plan an excursion into New York City or the Empire Building or the Statue of Liberty. I rode the subways, went to Central Park, and this picture I took on Broadway. And to me, it was like New York City was a giant zoo, and it was like I had my camera, and I tried to document it. And it was just it was a great summer. I learned a lot, and the staff at that newspaper was world renowned, and a half dozen of the photographers had come from Life and Look magazine. So when I would pick their brain, and they had a world of knowledge, and to be around them was a real treat.
But then you came back to California to go to Cal Poly and work there. And one of your mentors brought you down to earth a little bit, didn't he?
That's true. Jim Hayes he was pretty much the guru at Cal Poly, and he called me into his office when I got back from New York, and he said to me, so you think you're a pretty hot shot now that you've been to New York? And he goes, and you had a great internship? And I go, yeah. And he goes, just remember, what have you done for me lately? You know, you're only as good as what you've done today. Don't live on your laurels in your past, and be thinking about the future and what you can do, not what you've done. And I really listened to that. And I've always tried to not be a braggart, and always listen to what I could do now, not what I've done. And I thought that was a great word of advice from him.
Mm. So you took that to heart, especially when you went to the Los Angeles Times in the 70s. And this photo for the Malibu fire really captured the grittiness and the desperation of the fire.
When my first job out of college was at the Thousand Oaks News Chronicle, which is no more. And it was a great experience because we basically slept with our scanners, and there was only 3 or 4 photographers, and we would capture the spot news, and I guess you could say we were all go-getters. And the Malibu Canyon fire, where this was from, is a picture I took, and it gave me some national recognition. I won a national clip contest with it. But more than that, the photo editor from the LA Times saw the picture, because the photographers at the LA Times would put the clips from all the other newspapers up because they were curious how all the other photographers covered it. And when I went and interviewed at the Times, this picture which ran a half page in my paper, was hanging on the wall of the photo office at the LA Times. And that was pretty cool to see that the other photographers really liked my work. And that fire was, to get where I was, take that picture, I almost got burned up. And I literally at one point was trying to outrun the fire. And I saw this house on fire, and I go, well, there's got to be firemen there. And because I was running full through a field that was burning up, and anyway, I made it to the house, and they go, how the hell did you get here? I go, just ahead of that. there was this huge fire coming, and I go, anyway, so it was, you could have reacted several ways. You could panic, or I could do just what the firemen were doing, which was do my job. And they dropped a load of borate on the fire retardant on this house, and it missed, and it nailed the firefighters. And the one of them looked up, and it knocked him flat. I mean, it just drilled him. And that's how I got that picture, because he was blinded from the fire retardant.
So being a photojournalist, you're really in the thick of action. I mean, this next photo of the biplane, it looks like it's straight out of a scene from the movie Wings. And you talk a little bit about this one. I thought this captures the intensity of the pilot as well as the flight itself.
Yeah, these Stearman, these are stunt planes basically, and I wanted to do a story on these guys that would fly these, and that's over the ocean. And I was sitting in the front seat, and the pilot, of course, is in the back seat, and I did this big picture story. And I kind of had a vision of this before I even did it, but that was the lead shot, and it was pretty cool. A writer went up as well, and the pilot said, "What kind of stunts do you want to do?" And I go, "Let's just fly and then get me back." And he was like, well, no, we can do barrel roll stalls. And he goes, well, let me just show you what a stall's like in one of these. So we did a stall, and he goes, you want to try something else? And I go, no, that's pretty good. I got all my gear in here. I don't want to have it go over the side. Anyway, it was a great
Okay.
story, but it enabled me it opened the door for other stories. And because they knew I would have tried anything.
Okay. Be honest, Tom. Did you lose your lunch on that one?
No.
Okay.
No, the gravity, it just, with the G's suck you into your seat. And
Mm-hmm.
I was too enthralled with taking pictures than to worry about anything else. Just getting that shot.
Another memorable shot I remember is when you came to City College to talk to our class with Mr. Canton. God, that Kelsey's just a great guy, just an amazing photographer. And without him saying anything, you proved it with this one photo. I just thought this was an incredible photo because just, it's just an amazing shot.
Yeah, that's part of a sequence. And I decided the hobbies I wanted to go cover and pick out on the weekends would be
Mm-hmm.
great photo. I wanted to pick ones that had great photo opportunities. And this was up in Lake Ming up in Bakersfield. And this was the most dangerous boat drags is the flat bottom. And as you can see, that boat has got a flat bottom. They're the most dangerous because when they catch air, they usually flip over. So you got to be careful how fast you go. And this guy was actually going he's going about 120 miles an hour right there. And it happened really quick. I got a sequence, and they ran it in the paper, the whole sequence in the sports section of the LA Times. By then I'd been hired at the Times, and he almost drowned. He was in a coma, and he never raced again, but he did live. But what it did, though, I got more national acclaim, and I won a national clip contest with that one as well. And I won every contest I entered that in, it won.
Mm.
So,
There was another boat shot that we don't have, but that was also memorable too because it actually involved a fatality. And if you can talk about your experience dealing with shooting something like that and having something so terrible happen.
well, it was a lot of times as a photojournalist, you come into a situation where, first of all, they don't want you there. And if something bad happens, they really don't want you there. And in this particular time, it was at Irvine Lake, and a boat went out of control, and it was going really like 180 miles an hour, and it went onto the shore. And the people that were promoting the show didn't bother to close the beach off, so there were kids playing in the lake. And when the boat came up there 180 miles an hour, it just went right into the beach, and it decapitated a 9-year-old girl, and really hurt another.
Wow.
It seriously injured a couple. And the promoters, when they got to the scene, their first thing was, we don't want this to be covered. So I had a really difficult choice to make. I took the pictures of the scene, and and it was a really challenging time because they were looking for people with cameras, and they were going to take your film whether you liked it or not. But they didn't see. There were so many people there. It was very chaotic, and it was really a tough scene. And I had someone come up to me, and she said, "You got all those pictures, didn't you?" And I go, "Yeah, I did." And she goes, "How can you live with yourself?" And I go, "Well, it won't be easy tonight." And she goes, "What do you mean?" And I took my sunglasses off, and I had tears coming down my face. And she goes, "Oh, you have a heart." And I go, I'm just doing my job. And if something good or bad happens, I'm going to photograph it. And she goes, "Where do you work?" And I go, "The LA Times." And I go, "And this is going to be in the paper tomorrow." And
Yeah.
but
Wow.
it was a tough situation. And sometimes that happens.
Well, on a lighter note, in your experiences, your career is taking you to do many great things, including covering like the Olympic Games.
Yeah, that was
And
lighter. later a little, that was a great experience.
And
And
then you also cover the World Series here. Let's show this photo. Of course, it's kind of bittersweet for Dodger fans because it's been over 31 years or so. But that's Oral Hershiser, it looks like, jumping into Rick Dempsey's arms, isn't it?
they won the World Series in '88. That was a
And
great experience.
what's it like to have to capture, to look for that one moment? And I think the moment that we just showed, as well as this one of Hale Irwin at the 1990 US Open, how difficult is that to capture the one defining moment of a sporting event like that?
You know, a lot of people say that pictures like this are luck, but you know, I say it's 99% skill and being at the right place at the right time, the last 1%. You know, you have to think about what's going on, and you try to use whatever memory you have and shooting things like this before and trying to imagine what's going to happen. And
Mm-hmm.
and this was a perfect case with Hale Irwin. At the end of the U.S. Open, they were tied. He was tied with another golfer. And then the next day, it's the only golf tournament where the next day you play 18 holes and the winner is the winner. Well, they played 18 holes the next day and they were still tied. So they went to another sudden death hole finally. And this very first sudden death hole, he sunk like a 12-foot putt. And I think the crowd was obviously on his side. And to me, the crowd was as important as him. So I actually focused on the crowd. And this was in Chicago, outside of Chicago. And the sports editor said one thing to me before I left on this assignment. He says, just remember, if AP beats you, we're going to use AP and not your picture. And so I sent this picture back, and an hour later, after the deadline was over, I called the sports editor, or maybe he called me, I can't remember. And I said, so who's getting the lead art? He goes, you are. And I was
Wow.
like, dude. And that was a great feeling to know that I beat out the national wire service.
That must have been very rewarding for you in your career to have, awards are one thing, but the respect of your editor is another whole different thing.
Yep. Because if you know that when you need an editor there to help make a decision, you know they're going to be there for you. And he knows I'm going to do my best to get a picture. And I always told him there's only one thing I won't do. And he says, what's that? And I go, don't ever ask me to jump out of a perfectly good airplane. Because I'm not going to do that. But about pretty much everything else, I did it.
So it's good to know you have your limitations.
Yes.
And yes, your work, though, has been recognized by the Pulitzer Committee. And talk a little bit about this experience that won you and your colleagues a Pulitzer Prize in 1983.
You know, to me, the biggest thing about the Pulitzer is, I didn't approach this assignment any different than I do any other assignment, in that, you try to do your best, you try to think it out, and you do the best job you can. And for me, the biggest thing with the Pulitzer is I won a lot of contests, but when the people saw this on my resume, it really opened doors. And when I went back to interview, they wanted me to come back to Colorado and work for the Rocky Mountain News in Denver. And the photo editor there was she was a very renowned editor. And she goes, I want to meet a Pulitzer winner, this Pulitzer winner we have at the LA Times. And I said, all right, well, we can do that. Because they were getting a baseball team there. And they'd never had baseball in Colorado. So they wanted someone who had experience, and they ended up hiring me. And it was just a great experience, because I remember going out to lunch with all the editors of the paper, and they all wanted, I remember walking to this restaurant in downtown Denver, and the one editor, the assistant editor, so you want a Pulitzer, huh? And I go, yeah. So to me, it was amazing, because I had, I think, taken better pictures at other events and other things, but
Mhm.
this was definitely had a lot of clout, and it was pretty cool.
Mm. There's also another side to you, Tom, about nature because you spend a lot of time in Yosemite and Yellowstone with your father, and you did some work under a pretty famous photographer by the name of Ansel Adams.
That's true. Um, it goes back to when I was in high school. My dad was a seasonal ranger in Yosemite, and so when I wasn't hiking or backpacking or fishing, I would go down to the Ansel Adams Gallery and just look at his work, and I'm like, how could I ever take a picture like that? And I was
Mm.
just like 16 years old, and so my goal from that summer was I really fell in love with. That's really what got me my love for photography started was him, and eventually when I got hired at the Times, I wanted to go to one of his workshops. So to get into one of his workshops, you had to type a single spaced paper, and I did a 3-page letter of why I wanted to go. And I told him about my love for his work and my work, and I love the zone system. I knew a lot about him because I read everything that he did, and I also looked at all his photographs. And so anyway, I sent my application off, and they only accept about 75 people. And this was in 1981, and I got a letter back saying I was accepted. So that was a huge thrill. And I got to spend a week with him and these world-class teachers, and it was a very exciting time. And got to eat and critique by his work. We got to eat with him and go on field trips with him, and it was a really neat experience. I did a whole picture story on it, and eventually I did a portrait of him that I sent him, and I had him sign a moonrise over Hernandez poster that
Uh-huh.
I had, and he actually sent me a postcard back and thanked me, and I still have that postcard framed.
Wow, I
And
bet.
that was the last workshop he ever did. And because
So,
he had heart issues and he couldn't go to the altitude anymore.
okay.
So
So that led to your own book, eventually further down the road a few years ago, The Spirit of the West, correct?
correct. And that came out when I was in Santa Barbara, and that was about 10 years ago, 9 years ago. And it was a great it was a time for me to coalesce many, when I took a lot of landscape and wildlife pictures throughout my career, and I always considered it my therapy. When I got out of town from dealing with people or politicians or very high pressure situations, I would go to some place like this to quote decompress and recharge. And
Mm-hmm.
this is up in Big Sur. It's one of my favorite spots in the world, McWay Falls, and it's social media has kind of changed how when I took this, not as many people were as what's the word? Everyone knows about it now, but then there were secret spots, and a lot of those secret spots are no longer secret because of social media, and it's photography's changed a lot in that regard. And that's
Mm-hmm.
the biggest thing the internet does is now everyone can sit in their living room and go to these wild places all over the world without having to leave their living room. And but it was a great project, and it did really well, and I'm happy I did it. And then I have a number of projects in my head, and I've that kind of when I got that one done, I kind of put the other one on the front burner, which is the one we have now. And I actually have a couple more that are
Mm-hmm.
back burner, but doing the Spirit of the West was a great deal because it was landscape and wildlife from all over the West, from Alaska to the Baja, and
Mm.
some of my favorite spots. And I condensed down many photos to about my favorite, 130 photos.
Okay. So let's jump ahead to the current project. How
Okay.
did this come about?
Well, it started when in my introduction in the book, I was standing on Goleta Beach when I was 14 years old, and we were at the beach, and Santa Barbara Airport's right there, and this was when I was a kid. I was like a freshman in high school, and I was there with my whole family, and this plane took off over the ocean. When the wind was just right, they would direct air traffic, and an air tanker took off over. It was a B-7, and I remember saying to my, "That's how it used to be," and anyway, it was a fire tanker, and I had said, I wonder what stories that could tell, that plane, that aircraft, and that kind of really, from then on, I got really involved and interested in warbirds and World War II, and mainly because my dad was in World War II, and but he never spoke about it, so I never. I think what really got me going on it was I wanted to know everything my dad didn't tell me. So that
Speaking
kind of,
of B-17s,
yeah.
this has a little bit of a story, interesting story, if you could share that
Yeah,
with our listeners.
I took this picture last year, and this is Colonel, he became a Colonel, Earl T. Williams, and he was in Riverside, and he trained at March Air Base, and believe it or not, the night before World War II started, the night before Pearl Harbor, he had left with a squadron of 12 B-17s from San Francisco, Bay Area, and they flew to Pearl Harbor, and they were full of gas, and that's all. They had no guns, they had no armament at all. And we were at peacetime, and that was on December 6th, 1941. And he had the misfortune of arriving at Pearl Harbor at the same moment as the Japanese were attacking Pearl Harbor.
Oh.
And literally was mixed in with the Japanese planes. And the top gunner in the B-17 had said, captain got on the interphone and said, why are we surrounded by planes? And he goes, oh, they're just probably giving us an escort. And a minute later, he says, captain, those escort are firing at us. And it turns out they were Japanese planes. And that plane became the first warplane shot down, American warplane shot down in World War II, and he was on it. And it landed on fire at Hickam Air Base in Pearl Harbor, and he survived. Two of the people that were in the plane with him did not, and were killed.
Okay.
And that was his introduction to World War II.
Wow. So these photos that you took of the modern day photos, were they on digital or were they film? Because all your other like newspaper photos were on film, of course. Barbara wanted to know. What about the ones that the more modern ones that you took?
The big switch over to digital really came around 2000, 2002. And pretty much, I didn't use a digital camera till the first time I used a digital camera on assignment was they handed me one at the 1998 World Series with the Padres and the Yankees. And I go, what am I supposed to do with this? And because it was very slow and cumbersome and not very good. And they go, well, this will cut our time down, way down, our processing time, because you don't have to process it. You just send us the image. And but it was pretty horrible. I mean, it had a second and a half lag from the time that you push the shutter. It took the picture a second and a half later, which in baseball would be pretty challenging if you're trying to get a play at the home plate.
Yeah.
You'd have to push the shutter a second and a half before they reached home plate. So it was I'm like, yeah, this is good. I wanted to throw it in the trash, but it was very expensive. And yeah, obviously things have really improved since then.
Interesting.
I didn't really make the switch over till about 2003.
Okay. So this photo is a famous person, Louis Zamperini, the former Olympic runner, who was made famous by the book and then the movie Unbroken for his survival of being captured for survival on the raft for like 33 days. Then he was captured as a POW in a Japanese prisoner of war camp for several months. and he survived against all odds. He survived. Uh, he, like you, he was a distance runner. But there's also a backstory behind this that he knew your father.
Yeah, that's true. He when he went to the Olympics in 1936 in the 5,000 meters, the United States sent 3 runners for each event, like they do today still. And the 2 other runners that he went with in his event were both from Indiana University, which is where my dad went. And my dad ran track there too, but he was about 4 years, 4 or 5 years younger than Louis Zamperini. And so he knew the guys that he ran against. And they later, my dad and our family and his family would go camping together out by 29 Palms when I was very, very young. And I wish I would have been young or older so I could have been there. But basically, he and my dad would sit out at a campfire at this motel they would stay at. And I asked my mom, I go, how long would they do that? He goes, sometimes till sunrise. And they would talk all night. And I go, did you ever listen in? And she goes, no, I had 2 young babies. And I go, well, how old was I? And she goes, 3. And I go, and he goes, well, they had a lot in common. And so I go, really don't know, but I can just imagine what they were talking about, because I'm sure he had great stories. And although they did not make a movie out of what my dad did, but I'm sure my dad was like, holy smokes, what happened there? And but that was they became good friends, and every summer we would go camping with the Zamparinis out by Joshua Tree in the desert, because he loved the desert, my folks loved the desert. And I didn't see him from that time till when he came to Santa Barbara. He came to the Earl Warren Showgrounds and spoke in 2013, and that's where I got that picture of him. And then he passed away in 2014. But he was a great guy. And then Angelina Jolie did the Unbroken, the motion picture, and there was the book that was incredible. If you haven't ever read that book, it's pretty incredible.
It is an amazing book.
And
if I can jump ahead, this gentleman was from Santa Barbara, correct?
No.
He's not from Santa Barbara. I'm sorry.
He lives down in Sun City near Riverside, and he's 95. And I took this up to him in this photograph, and which that actual photograph is right behind me on the wall. But that's the cover of my new book. And his name is Richard Hartung, and he was a top gunner in a B-24 bomber. And he is the last person alive to see last U.S. airman alive to see the atomic blast over Hiroshima. He was 9 miles away in a B-24, and he saw it, and he said that he immediately, of course, they saw the mushroom cloud immediately, and they said, wow, they must have hit a bomb dump or something. And then the shockwave hit their B-24, which was about 9 miles away. And he said it was an absolute incredible experience. Like, it was like being on a roller coaster, and it knocked the plane way down. And they had no idea what it was, but they said, whatever that was, that is going to leave a mark. It was like an incredible explosion. And so in the book, I actually have him holding a picture of the explosion, the atomic bomb went off. And he wasn't, and people say, well, he wasn't in a B-29. And I go, no, he was in another mission, and they'd already dropped their bombs about 9 miles away and had made the turn when it was dropped. And I guess the people that set up the mission didn't realize what a shock it would have even 10 miles away.
I didn't want to spoil too much reading, but I did want you to share one story that I thought was particularly heartfelt in the book, and I was wondering if you'd be willing to read a little bit from the book about this gentleman right here.
Sure, it's not too long, but this is John Kaiser. John Kaiser was a sergeant in the Air Corps and the Army Air Force, and he was a tail gunner, and he in 1945. That's how he looked on the left, and on the right was last December. Let me read you what his story was, and I'll be brief, but this is right out of the book. On March 31st, 1945, John Kaiser became a POW on his 17th mission after his B-17 took a direct hit by flak, taking out its number 3 engine, dislodging it completely from the aircraft during a bombing raid over Zeitz, Germany. The last communications on the interphone came from the pilots saying they would try to reach the Russian lines. There were noises from the front that sounded like pieces of plane were ripping away. Mind again, he's a tail gunner in the very back of the plane. Then we were hit again a few seconds later by more flak, and the aircraft started down in a steep glide. I could see nothing but smoke and called on the interphone, but no one answered. The plane was vibrating so bad that I decided to get out. The tail gunner was momentarily trapped as his flight suit snagged on the escape hatch, which was compounded by his lack of oxygen at 21,000 feet. At that moment, things looked grim, but he managed to free himself and his parachute, and as he fell from the sky, he realized he was directly over a German airfield. And hundreds of people were looking skyward as he approached and appeared from the stricken bomber. The landing knocked him unconscious, and when he came to, he was prisoner by Luftwaffe soldiers. He was eventually taken to a POW camp in Weimar, Germany, where the German interrogator asked him to name the crew members that he was with. And he said, as proof, he produced a basket containing the dog tags, billfolds, watches, and other personal items of the men. Sergeant Kaiser was allowed to look through these belongings, and when he found the wedding ring of his pilot, First Lieutenant Arthur Larson, he asked the interrogator if he would allow him to take the ring for Lieutenant Larson's widow. He replied, sure, and he gave it to him. Lieutenant Larson was from the same hometown as the pilot, and they were from Houston, Texas. Sergeant Kaiser was the sole survivor of the B-17 and spent the rest of the war as a POW. 2 weeks later, German guards mockingly told him in German that FDR had died, not realizing that he understood them because of his German descent and his 2 years of German he studied in high school. Franklin Delano Roosevelt died on April 12th, 1945. And that was his story from the day he got shot down over Germany. And I didn't see him. I saw him in December, and unfortunately he passed away in March of this year. And he was a long time. He lived in Santa Barbara, and he lived across the street from Bishop Diego High School. And it was really sad to know that unfortunately that he passed away. But he did tell his story, and an incredible story it was.
What about the story of you actually meeting John?
Well, when I met John, it was 10 years before that, in 2010, so 9 years before that. And this was at the Santa Barbara airport this is the first time I saw John right there. And he was there. There was a B-17 visiting Santa Barbara from Oshkosh, Wisconsin, called Aluminum Overcast. And I saw him standing there with his walker. And it was a very overcast, gloomy day. It looked like it was going to rain. And I just kept my distance. And finally, I noticed a lady who's way out of the picture on the left. I went up to her because she was staring at him. And I said, do you know this gentleman? And she goes, yeah, I'm his caretaker. And I go, what's going on? She goes, why don't you go ask him? So I walked up to him and I said, John, I didn't know his name. I just said, excuse me, sir, are you okay? And he said, yeah, I'm okay. And I said, do you have a special connection with this plane? And he goes, the last time I was around one, I was shot down in one. And this is the first time I've been near a B-17 since that day in 1945. And I go, were you the tail gunner? And he goes, yep. And I was the only survivor of my plane. And I just was remembering that day. And I said, wow. Anyway, we kind of both had a moment right there. And give me a minute. So I got his phone number, and he ended up going on a flight with that plane. And so did I. And I didn't hear from him. I lost his number, and he wasn't in the white pages or anything. And I made a huge search to find him last year, and I actually found him. And he was alive and living in his own home still. And it was he actually remembered the day he met me, and we chatted. He was staying in a hospital bed in his room, but he had a clear memory, and we chatted for almost 4.5 hours, and I was the one that was getting tired. And so that there was a 9-year period between then and when I met him, and then when I finally got some photos of him and got to hear the rest of the story. And what a story it was.
And what a story you've put together. And you've dedicated this book to the greatest generation. But also, part of that dedication was to your father, Charles. And I believe some of the items of your father's military career are sitting behind you in your room. Is that not correct?
That's true. I'm in the den right now of my home, and behind me is my dad's jacket, his army jacket from World War II, and with his commendations. And on my other side is the campaign map of his infantry division. He was actually in a battery. He was not in the Air Corps. Well, actually, he started in the Air Corps and was being trained to be a bombardier. But then before D-Day, they transferred many men and soldiers from the Air Corps because they needed them for the ground effort. So he was transferred to infantry division, the 86th Infantry Division, and he was in a battery. He fired a cannon. Which I grew up hearing. I always had to talk to him from his right side because his left side, he was pretty much deaf in one ear. And I remember asking him, I go, so what's the deal there? And he goes, well, if you'd fired a howitzer, you'd be deaf in one ear too. And so yeah, I have and he basically was the reason I wanted to really do this book, because he would never speak of his military and his wartime experiences. And I ended up so I started interviewing people that would. And it's been over 30 years when I started interviewing veterans from the war.
Wow, what a great project. And I think we have a couple questions here, Tom. C. Morales, if you want to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to know if you had any experience with a plane that had come to our area in recent years called the 909. I'm sorry to say, I think it's no longer airworthy. I wonder if that's in your book.
The 909, the B-17, the 909.
Yes.
Yeah, it's actually got a very predominant spot in my book, and there are a number of photographs of the 909 in my book. And I actually gave a tribute page to it in my book, because the very final time that I saw the 909, which was in a little airport in French Valley, California, they were giving rides, and I'd seen the plane a number of times, and in Santa Barbara, and also and a number of places. But that was interesting because they parked there was a restaurant at the airport, and it was all glass. So I got to, of all the pictures I took of it in flight and everything, and I even have a T-shirt from the 909. It was there when I had lunch, and I was sitting at the bar having a sandwich at this airport cafe, and I go, wow, that is a very cool shot, because framed in the whole frame of the window outside the restaurant was the 909 parked. It was parked right there. And I titled it The Last Photograph I Took of the 909. And it unfortunately crashed, and there was a loss of life. It was a many thousands and people flew on that great B-17, and it traveled all over the country to give closure and to many veterans who flew in it and were able to see it again. And it was a great airplane. There's only 9 B-17s still airborne and are still flying. And I saw it come a couple times to Santa Barbara. It was very cool to see it on final approach, coming over Fairview Boulevard right into the airport. And it always traveled with a B-24 and a P-51. And it was extremely sad when I heard that crash. I've got a whole section and a number of pages in the book on that aircraft.
Wow, that's a great question. Does anybody else have a question? Well, thank you very much for joining Tom and us at Chaucer's for this wonderful event. We do have a number of signed copies of Tom's book in our store, so please feel free to come by. And Tom, it's great catching up with you, and somebody I respect and have admired for a number of years and also have worked with. And I'm really happy for you in this book, and I wish you nothing but the best.
Great, I really appreciate it. And the reason I did this book, because some people would say, well, that's really not your cup of tea. And but it should be all our cup of teas. I feel that the debt of gratitude that I have for our veterans and the greatest generation, just feel very strong about it. And even though I really love landscape and wildlife, and my next project's going to be on black and white photography, and that's going to be my next project, but that's down the road. I had to do this book. It got to a point where I've got to do this. And the final hurdle took the last 5 years. So it was, I just really wanted to honor the sacrifice of the reason we don't have to speak German or Japanese or because of those guys. And, I just feel very strongly about our veterans, and I would do anything to help them out. And so that's how this book came about.
Well, you did, and now we're looking for your next book that's going to be a la Ansel Adams. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us. Have a wonderful evening. Bye.
Thank you, Mike.